My garden was flooded with sewage by the HOA, and when I complained, they laughed. That's when I realized, if they could flood my land, maybe it was time I returned the favor. They never expected what I poured into their office. Stay with me. This is the story of how one homeowner turned the tables on a corrupt HOA. I never thought a normal Tuesday morning would be the day everything I loved began to rot. Literally. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, expecting a quiet moment in my garden. Instead, I nearly slipped face first into a bubbling brown puddle. The smell hit me like a freight train. Raw sewage. Thick. Pungent. Unmistakable. At first, I thought maybe a neighbor had a busted pipe. But the puddle wasn't isolated. It stretched across my yard like a slow-moving sludge river. My tomato plants, the ones that had won first place at last year's county fair, were submerged. My workshop, where I built birdhouses with the neighborhood kids, had water seeping through the floorboards. My tools sat soaking in filth. I froze in disbelief. This wasn't a leak. It was a flood, and it wasn't stopping. Panic turned into urgency. I called the emergency line for the Maple Grove Estates HOA. After 20 minutes on hold, Karen Thompson finally answered. Her voice sounded irritated, like I was bothering her mid-massage. "What seems to be the problem, Mr. Reynolds?" she asked with a sigh. I explained, quickly and clearly, that sewage was flooding my property, destroying everything in its path. She responded with the kind of indifference only a bureaucrat with a clipboard could master. "We authorized some plumbing changes yesterday," she said. "It's probably just a temporary side effect." "Side effect? My entire yard is covered in human waste," I snapped. Karen didn't flinch. "We'll send someone to look next week when our maintenance team is available." "Next week? You expect me to live like this for 7 days?" Her tone turned sharp. "Perhaps you should have thought about potential drainage issues before buying so close to the community line, or before buying in Maple Grove at all." That last part stung. I knew exactly what she meant. Since I moved in 3 years ago, I was always different. My house wasn't fancy. I drove a pickup, not a luxury sedan. I worked with my hands. I didn't fit the aesthetic. She hung up. I sat at my kitchen table, the stench already creeping in through closed windows. Even my dog, Rusty, refused to step outside. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at old photos, my garden in bloom, the workshop bustling with kids, neighbors smiling over fresh vegetables. And now, it was all drowning. I called the county health department. They said they couldn't come until Friday. So I sat, helpless, watching my life sink deeper into the mud. And as I stared out at the filth soaking the roots of everything I'd built, I made a quiet vow. If the HOA thought I'd just accept this, they had no idea who they were dealing with. By the second day, the sewage wasn't just a mess, it was a message. And I was starting to understand exactly who it was meant for. The gurgling sound from the pipe didn't stop. By then, I had traced its source, a freshly installed line hidden behind some bushes on HOA common ground. It was spewing waste like clockwork, day and night, straight into my yard. I took dozens of pictures and videos, my boots sinking in muck as I documented everything. I needed someone to witness it, someone who would take it seriously. So when I saw Howard Wilkins, the HOA treasurer, walking his poodle nearby, I waved him down. "Howard, can you come take a look at this?" He hesitated, then strolled over slowly, keeping a healthy distance from the sewage. I pointed to the pipe. "This is dumping straight into my yard. The HOA installed it, didn't they?" Howard's face shifted. "I'm not aware of any installation. Must be a county issue," he said. "You should check with them." "But Karen told me yesterday the HOA had authorized plumbing changes." "She must have misspoken," he replied, already tugging his dog away. "Precious needs her walk." I stood there in disbelief, the stench rising behind me like proof of betrayal. They were lying to my face. And worse, they didn't even care if I knew it. By day 3, the sewage pond had grown into a swamp. My backyard looked like something out of a disaster film. The smell was unbearable. My dog refused to go outside, and then the phone calls started, from neighbors. "Hey, just wanted to check. "Is it true your septic tank burst?" one of them asked. "My kids can't play outside with that smell. Can you fix it?" another said. They weren't calling the HOA. They were calling me. Somehow, Karen had turned the story around, told them I was the problem, that my system had failed, that I was polluting the neighborhood. At first, I thought maybe someone would offer to help. But no one came. Not a single knock on my door. People I'd once shared fresh vegetables with now crossed the street when walking their dogs. At the grocery store, an elderly couple I used to greet every Saturday turned their backs when they saw me. I was being painted as the nuisance, the outsider, the problem. That night was the worst. I sat in my dark living room, unable to sleep, the smell thick in the air. I looked through my blinds and saw two shadows at the edge of my property, Karen and Howard, pointing, taking notes, whispering. They disappeared when I turned on the porch light. They weren't ignoring me anymore. They were planning something. I felt it in my bones. They wanted me gone. And they didn't care how they made it happen. By the fourth day, I realized this wasn't just a plumbing mistake. This was a setup. And the deeper I dug, the clearer the picture became. I hadn't slept much. The stench was one thing, but it was the silence from the HOA that made it unbearable. No calls, no workers, no apologies. Just Karen's smug dismissal and Howard's polite lies. But I couldn't sit by and let them bury me in filth and red tape. I started making calls. Lots of them. I reached out to the county health department again, then the building inspector's office, and even the Department of Environmental Quality. Each gave me the same answer. "We'll schedule a visit. Next week." But I didn't have a week. My property was rotting by the hour, so I took matters into my own hands. I borrowed a pipe tracing camera from my friend Stanley, a plumber my dad had trusted for years. He agreed to help. When Stanley arrived and saw my yard, his jaw clenched. "This isn't normal backup," he muttered. "This is redirection." We spent half the day tracing the flow of the sewage, digging shallow trenches to follow its path. Finally, we found it. A thick PVC pipe freshly installed and completely off the original neighborhood plans. "This pipe," Stanley said, pointing with a gloved hand, "diverts waste from the new community center. It's supposed to go into the main sewer line. Instead, it runs straight here, onto your land." My stomach dropped. "Why would anyone do that?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "To save money," Stanley replied bitterly. "Fixing the main line properly would have cost them $50,000. Minimum. Dumping it here? Practically free." I paid Stanley extra to document everything. Photos, timestamps, an official report. And as I held that folder in my hands, something inside me clicked. This wasn't an accident. It was a decision. A cold, calculated one. My property wasn't just collateral damage. It was targeted. Later that evening, I marched to the HOA office with Stanley's report. Karen's assistant met me at the front desk with her usual fake smile. "Do you have an appointment?" "This is an emergency," I replied, holding up the report. "Email your concern to the committee," she said without even glancing at the pages. Through the glass, I could see Karen lounging in her office, laughing on the phone with her feet on the desk. Our eyes met, and she turned her chair around like I wasn't even there. I left the report on the desk anyway. But as I turned to leave, I heard something that froze me in my tracks. The sound of a shredder. Her assistant was feeding the report through, strip by strip, never breaking eye contact. That night, I didn't sleep. But I didn't just stew in anger either. I got to work, documenting everything, building my case. Because now I understood exactly what was happening. And the only way to beat a dirty game was to play smarter than the people rigging it. The more I dug, the more the truth stank, worse than the sewage in my yard. I wasn't just dealing with an incompetent HOA. I was up against a network of deception designed to protect their own interests, no matter the cost to people like me. And the more they tried to bury the truth, the more determined I became to drag it into the light. It started with a mistake on their part, a digital one. While checking my email one night, I noticed something strange. I had been copied into an internal HOA email chain by accident. Probably just a slip-up, a misclick on someone's part. But that slip-up changed everything. The subject line, Reynolds situation, containment strategy. I opened it with shaking hands. In the thread, Karen wrote, Reynolds is still complaining. Deny everything. He'll give up eventually. These working-class types can't afford legal help anyway. Another board member chimed in. Once he's desperate enough to sell, Thompson Development can move forward with the cul-de-sac expansion. Thompson Development. Karen's husband's company. My throat went dry. It wasn't just about sewage. It was about land. My land. And the flood? It was a pressure tactic, designed to make me give up, sell cheap, and disappear. Just like they'd done to that man I met in the parking lot weeks before, Daniel Hoffman. I forwarded the email to a secure account and printed several copies. I stored them in 3 different locations, just in case. Because now I wasn't just a homeowner with a complaint. I was a whistleblower in the middle of a scheme. I started reaching out to the neighbors, quietly. I remembered the sympathetic faces at the HOA meeting, the nods, the whispered apologies. I invited 5 of them over for coffee. All of them came. Jennifer, who used a wheelchair, shared that the HOA had denied her ramp request 3 times. They said it would ruin the aesthetic, she said, her voice bitter. I had to pay $7,000 out of pocket and still got fined. Michael, another neighbor, said they charged him $500 a day for having solar panels. Even though state law protects them, he muttered. One by one, they shared their own stories. Over-regulation. Fines with no warning, selective enforcement. And every case had one thing in common, targeting people who didn't fit in. The older, the modest, the working class. By the time we finished, we weren't just neighbors. We were witnesses. And we weren't going to take it anymore. We formed a group that night. Maple Grove Homeowners for Fair Treatment. Our mission? Hold the HOA accountable and protect every resident from the same abuse I'd suffered. The next morning, I visited the county records office again. That's when I uncovered a critical detail. The HOA had never filed proper permits for the plumbing at the new community center, meaning their entire drainage system was off the books. They had dumped industrial sewage on my land to save money and done it illegally. The final straw came a few hours later. I received a certified letter from the HOA. Notice of violation. Yard conditions. $100 per day fine, effective immediately. They were fining me for the sewage they dumped. That night, as rain began to fall again, I sat at my table with all the evidence. Emails, photos, testimonies, engineering reports. I looked out the window at the swamp my yard had become, and then I looked down at my notes. No more waiting, no more pleading. It was time to fight back, not with fists, with truth. And with truth on my side, even the most crooked board wouldn't stay standing for long. In the end, it wasn't a sewer pipe that exposed them. It was an email. For weeks, I'd been digging in the dark, scraping together evidence while the HOA shrugged off my complaints and fined me for the mess they caused. But then, like a crack in a dam, the truth spilled out. Not through an investigation, not from a whistleblower, but from a mistyped email address. Karen and her board had accidentally copied the entire neighborhood into a thread they thought was private. I'll never forget the subject line. Reynolds situation, containment strategy. My heart thudded in my chest as I opened it. Every sentence confirmed what I had only suspected before. Howard, the treasurer, had written, "The diversion was necessary. Fixing the main sewer line would have triggered a $22,000 special assessment. This was cleaner, financially." Then Karen responded, "Reynolds' lot was always meant to be a drainage point anyway. Deny everything. He can't afford legal action. By the time inspectors respond, we'll have our story straight." Another reply read, "His house is the cheapest in the neighborhood anyway. Should never have been approved." I sat there frozen, rereading every line. They didn't just dump sewage onto my land. They planned it. They justified it. And worst of all, they laughed about it. I printed every word. 3 copies, 1 for safekeeping, 1 for legal filing, and 1 I kept on my table, just to remind me why I couldn't back down now. The next morning, I called another meeting with my small group of neighbors. But this time, word had spread. 20 people showed up. I passed the emails around, letting the words speak for themselves. Faces turned red with anger. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Jennifer clenched the armrest of her wheelchair. "They denied my ramp for this?" she whispered. I stood before them, no longer just a frustrated homeowner, but someone who had seen the beast's face and survived it. "They're trying to force me out to build more homes," I told them. "But this isn't just about me anymore. Look around this room. How many of us have been fined, ignored, harassed for not fitting into their version of community standards?" Heads nodded. Tears welled in a few eyes. "They flood my yard, fine me for it, and plot in secret to profit off my suffering. But they made one mistake. They left a trail. And now we have it." The room filled with quiet determination. Then someone asked the question I hadn't spoken aloud yet. "So what are you going to do?" I looked down at the emails, at the pictures of my flooded garden, at the map showing the illegal sewage diversion, then back up. "I'm going to show them what real consequences feel like." That night, I laid out my plan. It wasn't legal. It wasn't clean. But neither was what they'd done to me. I called my cousin Ryan, the one with the concrete truck. "You still up for that favor?" I asked. He didn't even hesitate. "After what they've done to you," he said. "Tell me when." They had used sewage to drown me in silence. Now I would use something heavier to make sure they couldn't ignore me anymore. They thought working class meant powerless. But they forgot one thing. When you back someone into a corner, that's where they fight the hardest. They flooded my land. So I decided to return the favor, with something a little more permanent. By the time I'd gathered every report, every email, and every neighbor's story, one thing was clear. The HOA wasn't just negligent. They were deliberate, strategic. They knew exactly what they were doing when they rerouted sewage through my property. And when they shredded my evidence, fined me for the damage, and laughed about it behind closed doors, that's when I realized the time for polite complaints was over. But I didn't want to burn my life down. Not literally, not yet. I needed a message. Loud, undeniable, and disruptive. But not criminal. Not permanent. And that's when I remembered something my cousin Ryan told me months ago. "We used this eco-safe foam on a project last spring. Hardens like concrete. Looks like it too. But you can dissolve it with an enzyme wash." It clicked instantly. "Ryan," I said, calling him late one night. "How much of that stuff can you get?" His silence was short. "You're thinking what I think you're thinking." Oh yeah, we hashed out the plan. The HOA office would be closed for renovations next Friday. No staff, no cameras that actually worked. We'd disguise his truck as a county maintenance vehicle, slip in through the side door, and flood the office, floor to filing cabinet, with gray, industrial-grade construction foam. It wouldn't damage anything permanently, but it would leave a message they couldn't delete, deny, or shred. The next day, I mapped out the building layout, watched the comings and goings, and made notes. Karen's office had a custom Italian desk, a $1,000 coffee machine, and, most offensively, a 3-foot-tall portrait of herself in a faux gold frame. Perfect targets. That night, I gathered supplies like a man preparing for a heist. Gloves, burner phone, cheap hardware store mask. I even rehearsed unlocking the side door with a tension wrench, just in case. The day before the operation, Karen posted an announcement on the community board. "Renovating for a better HOA experience. See you all next week at the grand reopening." She had no idea what was coming. At 2 a.m., under moonlight and fog, Ryan parked 2 blocks away. His truck read County Water Services in vinyl letters we slapped on 20 minutes earlier. "You sure about this?" he asked, hands on the hose, engine idling. "They poured sewage into my garden," I said. "We're just leveling the field." We picked the lock, slipped inside, and when I aimed the hose at Karen's chair and pulled the trigger, I felt a strange peace wash over me. Thick, gray foam expanded across her polished floor, swallowing her desk, her paintings, her drawers full of fake fines and fabricated citations. The filing cabinets didn't stand a chance. When the job was done, I left a small touch, my old work gloves pressed into the half-set foam atop her desk. A calling card. A reminder. This wasn't random. This was personal. This was justice. By dawn, we were ghosts. No alarms, no damage, just silence and one very sealed office. I didn't sleep when I got home. I watched the sun rise over the sewage-soaked backyard that used to be my sanctuary, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled. They wanted me to give up. Instead, they gave me something better, a reason to fight harder. And by the time Karen opened that door and saw her empire entombed in foam, she'd know exactly who did it. And why. I watched from my porch that morning, coffee in hand, the same way some people watch sunrises or passing storms. But I wasn't waiting for peace or beauty. I was waiting for chaos. At exactly 8:30 a.m., Karen Thompson's silver Lexus pulled into the parking lot of the newly renovated Maple Grove HOA office. She stepped out in her usual blazer and heels, sunglasses perched like a crown, her clipboard clutched under one arm like a weapon. Her phone was already to her ear, her voice slicing through the morning quiet. But it didn't last. She walked to the front door, keys in hand, talking as she turned the lock. I leaned forward in my chair as she pulled the door open. And then, it stopped. The door opened just a few inches before slamming against something solid. Confused, she pushed harder. That's when she saw it. The cold, gray wall of hardened foam filling her beloved office like a concrete tomb. The same stuff she had once mocked as cheap filler during a budget meeting was now suffocating every drawer, desk, and display in her shrine to control. Karen screamed, a sound so sharp and so primal it startled birds from the trees. She backed away from the door as if it had struck her, her high heels catching the edge of the curb. She nearly fell, catching herself against the doorframe, then stood frozen, eyes wide, mouth open. And then, right on cue, the media arrived. 3 local news vans, alerted by a quiet tip from someone who might have called from a burner phone the night before, pulled into the lot. Reporters jumped out with cameras, microphones, and questions. They surrounded Karen like bees to sugar. Mrs. Thompson, can you comment on the damage to the HOA office? Is it true the board diverted sewage onto private property? Sources say the HOA president is under investigation for environmental fraud. Care to respond? Karen, still shaken, pointed directly at my house. It was him! Reynolds did this! Right as she yelled, a dark sedan pulled up and parked calmly near the crowd. A man in a suit stepped out, holding a briefcase and flashing a badge as he moved toward the cameras. Daniel Wright, District Attorney's Office, Environmental Crimes Division, he said clearly. We've been investigating Mrs. Thompson for 6 months, and thanks to Mr. Reynolds' documentation, we now have what we need to move forward. The crowd gasped. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. Mrs. Thompson, he continued, handing her a folded document, this is a warrant to search your home, office, and financial records. You are under formal investigation for embezzlement, falsifying documents, and illegal waste disposal. As if the universe had a sense of drama, Howard, the HOA treasurer, chose that exact moment to try and flee. He bolted from the crowd toward his car, clutching a laptop and several folders. He didn't make it 10 feet before 2 officers tackled him to the pavement. Bank statements flew from his hands like leaves in the wind, records showing hundreds of thousands in unaccounted HOA funds. Karen slumped against the car, speechless. From my porch, I sipped my coffee. It was over. Jennifer, the neighbor in a wheelchair they'd denied a ramp to for years, rolled up beside me with tears in her eyes. They're finally gone, she whispered. Because of you. No, not because of me. Because I didn't let them scare me silent. The foam-filled office cost nearly $1 million to clean and restore. The HOA's insurance nearly dropped them. But the real price was their power, gone overnight. At the next emergency meeting, the residents voted 91% in favor of removing the entire board. Karen and Howard both took plea deals to avoid jail time. As part of their community service, they were assigned to environmental cleanup projects, one of which happened to be down the street from my home. She couldn't look me in the eye. I didn't need revenge anymore. I had something better. My land restored, my community reborn, and a permanent reminder that when people push you into the mud, they're the ones who end up buried. And that handprint I left on her desk? Still talked about to this day. The day the DA's office stepped in, the ground shifted beneath our feet. But for the first time, it wasn't sewage. It was justice. After weeks of being ignored, fined, and lied to, I had grown used to shouting into the wind. County inspectors delayed, officials avoided paperwork, and the HOA doubled down on their harassment. But that changed the moment Daniel Wright, the lead investigator from the Environmental Crimes Division, stood on my porch and handed me a folder. "We've been watching Karen Thompson for a while," he said calmly. "But your evidence, your documentation, photos, the email thread, it was the missing piece." He flipped open the folder, showing me surveillance photos, bank records, and testimony. "You're not the only one. There are 5 other homeowners in this county who filed complaints. Some lost their homes, others were forced into silence." I was stunned. "So, you're saying this wasn't just about me?" He nodded. "No, Mr. Reynolds. This is part of a much larger pattern, and we believe your HOA president was the ringleader." It was the validation I hadn't even realized I'd been holding my breath for. The next 48 hours unfolded like a movie. Investigators raided the HOA office and Karen's home. Files were seized, hard drives taken. The smug control she had clung to so tightly crumbled under the weight of subpoenas and sworn statements. But it wasn't just Karen. The investigation uncovered a web of misconduct. Howard, the treasurer, had funneled HOA funds into fake construction contracts, including one signed by Karen's brother-in-law. Another board member had accepted cash consulting fees for approving permits that were never legally filed. And the crown jewel? A fake environmental compliance report that justified dumping sewage behind my property. They weren't just bullies, they were criminals. And now the law had caught up. Daniel kept me in the loop as the case progressed. "We're pushing for felony charges, fraud, environmental negligence, and conspiracy," he said. "They tried to paint you as a troublemaker, but now you're our star witness." Word spread fast. Neighbors who once avoided me now knocked on my door to thank me. Some brought pies. Others brought legal documents of their own, violations, fines, emails that echoed the same kind of abuse I'd endured. Jennifer finally got her wheelchair ramp approved. Michael reinstalled his solar panels. And the HOA's threat letters, they stopped permanently. At the next community meeting, with Karen and Howard formally removed, the neighborhood voted to dissolve the old HOA board entirely. A new committee was formed, led by residents, not tyrants, and they offered me a seat. I politely declined. "I've had enough HOA politics for one lifetime," I said. "But if you need help fixing that community garden idea, I'll bring the shovels." As for Karen and Howard, both pled guilty in exchange for lighter sentences. Part of their punishment involved environmental cleanup, assigned rather poetically to the same area their illegal drainage had poisoned. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Because standing on my porch, watching the county workers finally remove the last traces of sewage from my yard, I realized something. The system may be slow. It may be flawed. But with enough persistence and a little bit of concrete resolve, it still works. Sometimes the underdog doesn't just win. Sometimes he rewrites the rules. 6 months after the last dump truck left my property, I stood barefoot in my backyard, letting the morning dew kiss my toes. Where there had once been a toxic swamp of sewage and destruction, now bloomed a garden more vibrant than anything I had planted before. The tomatoes were bigger, the marigolds brighter. Even Rusty, my old dog, had found new joy trotting beside the rebuilt workshop where I once again shaped birdhouses from cedar wood. The air, once thick with foul odors and anxiety, now carried the scent of soil, wildflowers, and hope. The neighborhood had changed too. With the old HOA board gone, something surprising happened. People began to talk again. Fences that once divided were now lined with neighborly greetings. Children played on sidewalks that had once felt hostile. Jennifer's ramp was finally installed, and she rolled down the street waving at every house she passed. Michael helped rewire the community center to add free solar charging stations for anyone to use. And the HOA office? Gone. Replaced with a community garden co-op and a weekend farmers market, where locals traded fresh eggs, soap, hand-carved wooden toys, and homemade pies. It wasn't fancy, but it was real, honest, and for the first time, it belonged to all of us. The most unexpected gift came in the form of an envelope. Inside was a small gray slab, smooth, dense, about the size of a coaster. Mounted on it was a label. Concrete sample, Maple Grove HOA office, April 22nd. Taped to the back was a note from Daniel Wright. Sometimes the strongest message isn't spoken. It's set in stone. Thank you for refusing to back down. I keep that piece on my desk. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that even the ugliest fights can give way to something beautiful. That when you stand up, not just for yourself but for those around you, change can ripple farther than you ever imagined. The new HOA committee asked me to serve as a member. I declined again, smiling. You've got this. But if you ever need tomatoes for the summer festival, you know where to find me. At sunset, I often sit on my porch with Rusty at my feet, sipping lemonade as families pass by, laughing, chatting, living without fear. And I think to myself, not about the fight or the fines or the foam-filled office, but about what came after. About the community we built when the bad seeds were pulled out. A place where kindness grew back in their place. A place where justice had finally taken root. In the end, this story isn't just about sewage or revenge. It's about standing your ground when no one else will. It's about the quiet strength of a person who refuses to be bullied out of what they've built. And more importantly, it's about how one act of courage can grow into something much bigger than yourself. For anyone who's ever felt overlooked or underestimated, this story is a reminder that you're never too old, too small, or too ordinary to make a difference. The HOA thought they could intimidate a homeowner because he didn't have a luxury car or a designer house. But what they didn't count on was his resilience, his deep roots in the land, his connection to his neighbors, and his unwillingness to give up. One of the most powerful lessons here is that justice doesn't always arrive quickly, but it does arrive. Sometimes the legal system moves slowly. Sometimes it feels like no one is listening. But persistence matters. Documentation matters. Truth matters. And when it finally comes together, the impact is undeniable. Another message, especially meaningful for older generations, is this. Your community is only as strong as its people are willing to protect each other. What began as one man's fight became a movement. Neighbors who had once stayed silent found their voice, stood up for one another, and reclaimed their neighborhood from those who abused their power. And perhaps the most comforting takeaway of all, healing is possible. After the storm comes new growth. The garden that once drowned in filth bloomed again. Laughter returned to the sidewalks, and dignity was restored, not just for the man who fought back, but for everyone who lived in fear of the next letter, the next fine, the next knock on the door. So if you take anything from this story, let it be this. Never underestimate the power of one person standing firm in what's right, because sometimes that's all it takes to turn a mess into a movement and to build something better where injustice once stood.